I'm AJ Kittle, and we are going to be talking about Barn Burning by William Faulkner, written in 1939. So a little bit of background on Barn Burning, just for those of you who haven't read it. I highly suggest reading it before finishing this video because there will be some spoilers. This is set a little bit after the Civil War, and a family is going from town to town because they are sharecroppers, but they also burn a barn before they leave, like every city. And this is because of the father of the family, Abner Snopes. He is classified as an arsonist or a fire setter, according to some research, but he's never caught because of lack of evidence, and his family will not tell on him. The other main character is Sardi Snopes, and Sardi is the young son of Abner. He's 11 or 12 years old. Sardi doesn't necessarily agree with his father, and that creates a conflict in the story because on one hand we have Sardi, who is the protagonist, trying to go against his father and protect innocent people from their barns and property being destroyed. On the other hand, we have Abner. But what we're doing today is we are looking at Abner more and seeing the three-dimensional character that he is, because a lot of people see him as a surface character, as just like, this guy just hates and he's relentless and rigid, and that's really all there is to him besides, what made him cold in the first place. And then we also have Sardi, another three-dimensional character who is highly motivated. And we're going to look at those characters, we're going to analyze that a little bit, and we're also going to potentially empathize with Abner. And of course we're going to be looking at the family dynamics in this short story because there is a lot of evidence within the script that we can do some close reading on. First, we're going to be talking about the fire-setting tendencies of Abner. There's a lot of evidence of this within the short story. Abner is, in a way, cold. He's extremely cold to the character. He does everything he does with discipline and not necessarily passion. It's so scary for us to observe him and his tendencies. On page 3, we see that Abner struck the gaunt mules 2 savage blows, but without heat. It was not even sadistic. Faulkner had to point out how hard he hit these mules. It wasn't even sadistic, but it was so hard that he had to point it out. Abner also does not create these huge fires at night when they're just campfires, and here's why. The element of fire spoke to some deep mainspring of his father's being, as the element of steel or of powder spoke to other men, as the one weapon for the preservation of integrity, else breath were not worth the breathing, and hence to be regarded with respect and used with discretion. Page 4. To him, fire is interesting. It is living, it's active, it is his tool of survival, his means of justice, according to what we see here. Also on page 4, we see Abner strike his son, and it says that he struck Sardi with the exact force that he struck the mules with. Abner strikes his own family when he deems necessary with the same amount of force that he strikes mules. So he treats them like animals.
Oh, well. Larry, what the hell are you doing?
Larry!
Larry, you can't just... Oh,
Larry! Oh, are you all right? How did...
Larry!
There was some research conducted by authors Dalhusen, Codrant, and Liam, and the article is called Subtypes of Fire Setters. Research was conducted in the Netherlands. This research was done with inmates who had set fires in the past and had been arrested or turned themselves in, and it was examining the motives, and then they used those motives and the backgrounds of these fire setters to create data points and then categorize all those fire setters into different groups. What we're going to do is we're going to attempt to categorize Abner from his backstory into one of these 5 groups. What they found from the research was that most of the fire setters were male. They were single, unemployed. They actually had an above average IQ. Most of the self-reported offenses were from anger or revenge. That was what they said their motive was. We know that Abner is seeking revenge or justice when he is setting fires because someone wrongs him. The Despain household wrongs him by charging him stock for the damages done to the carpet that he just absolutely destroyed, and then he had his daughters try to clean it and destroy it even worse. He feels he's been personally wronged by the town seeking justice and making a fair claim. I believe Abner fits in one of these two clusters. The third category of these fire setters was mostly women. Well, had the highest proportion of women. They had the highest hostility as well. 22% of them, their motive was revenge, and 9% of them was a cry for help. The fourth cluster of fire setters did their fire setting without planning. It was impulsive to some degree. And this group had been behaviorally disturbed from the age of 12. So from 12 years old, these kids were messed up and they went on to set fires. Also, this fourth cluster, 33% of their motives were revenge and retribution. So we see a high level of people seeking revenge through fire setting. This is their expressive means to accomplish their goal. The explanation for this third cluster is kind of as follows. They had more developmental and psychological problems than the other groups. A lot of these fires were potentially causing harms to other people. These individuals are seeking retribution or revenge in most cases. Overall, we can kind of categorize Abner as one of the third group clusters, but it's kind of hard to tell based on our evidence because he doesn't act impulsively per se. He usually waits until it's the right time, until he has gotten his share of crops so he can just leave, and he prepares the wagon before he goes. Cluster 4 was even a higher prevalence of revenge and retribution as a motive. These people were associated with interpersonal problems. However, they were impulsive. A lot of them had really poor social skills, no friends, but this is the most important part. Quote, they had commonly been victims of childhood caregiver physical abuse and emotional neglect. These individuals had already experienced child abuse at some point in their life, which makes us question, did Abner learn his child abuse tendencies from his father or family? Is this a cycle of child abuse that will translate down to Sardi? We have evidence from the story Close Reading that Sardi may just follow his father's footsteps. In the last paragraph, there's mention of constellations wheeling on and that he could keep walking to cure his pain and stiffness, and he's walking towards the dark woods. You might argue that the woods symbolizes the darkness that has been in his family. He might just continue towards that darkness. So it says multiple times the word cold and dark, and this is representative of his father, who is cold and dark and just has a terrible demeanor. So it's possible that this is symbolism that Sardi will continue on in his father's footsteps, eventually have his own family, and abuse his own children, and potentially express and cope in ways that are not suitable for society. There is other evidence of child abuse and family matters being an issue in this short story. An article called Why the Father Wound Matters, Consequences for Male Mental Health and the Father-Son Relationship by Eric D. Miller explains this issue between fathers and sons where there's not a real connection and not a real bond. It's still prevalent today, according to this article, and it pretty much always has been prevalent. Ultimately, there's a strain on the relationship because the son and father can't relate to each other. The mother tends to be closer to the son and also the daughter than the father does because there's this emotional disconnect. The article cites another piece of research from Petit and Petit 2002. It says, many men who are about to become fathers feel that they're on their own. Their own fathers may have been physically or emotionally absent, causing what family experts call a father wound. So that's what the father wound is. It is the pain that the child feels because their father was emotionally or physically absent. So the father could have left. We're talking like a single mother family or just a one-parent family, or because the father is not present in the relationship. Within our story, we see that Abner does not really connect to his children besides the indoctrination of them. On page 1, Sardi thinks to himself, "Our enemy," he thought in that despair, "Arn, mine and his'n both. He's my father." So Sardi is thinking to himself, oh, this person is my enemy because he's my father's enemy. That's the indoctrination. Oh, we're family. We're very close. So, yeah, that's my enemy too, even though I might disagree with them. But as we go throughout the story, that progresses to be not as strong, and then he realizes there's more out there than just his family. The indoctrination breaks. The indoctrination in Sardi also causes frantic grief and despair, page 2. Grief and despair is mentioned multiple times in this short story, along with fear. Sardi fears his father. He doesn't necessarily respect his father. That's what makes it so difficult on the relationship, is because it's more fear and despair than respect, love, nurture, care. In fact, most of the time, Abner can't really feed his children well because of how poor he is. According to this article, the creation of the father wound could be considered a form of child abuse because it causes psychological damage to the children. For example, Sardi is damaged by this because he has felt this fear, this despair for his entire life. That's psychologically damaging. This is creating a difference in his upbringing, which is really negative and detrimental. Even after Sardi betrays his father, he still feels grief and despair. And this could be because he just lost his father, but this grief and despair existed long before he lost his father. His father wasn't even present before. Maybe that's why I was feeling the grief and despair, because of this father wound that was created in Sardi. Not only does this father wound exist in Sardi, but it probably also exists in his whole family, as Abner does not really care much for them more than as if they were animals. For example, Abner references his daughters as livestock. They're basically just farm animals to him. So he's not there in the relationship. He is just existing and doing his thing. But that could also be because he was abused as a child and hurt through his experiences. Not saying that's an excuse, but we're going to quickly watch an excerpt of a video called Safe Place. So we see the father drinking, and then we see his son pushing an object in front of a door to keep him out. This has happened multiple times to this child. He already knows what he is coming next. So we see him cowering away. This is similar to the fear, the grief, and despair. And you can just see, you saw his father step right onto that toy that was his son's, and then he opens the door wide and the safe place is no longer safe. There is no protection, there is no hiding. His father in this short film is relentless, just as Abner is relentless. This is a perfect example, in my opinion, of the relationship. This is going to create a divide between this father and this son, because how can you return from such violence and mistreatment? This is creating psychological and physical damage in the son in this short film, as Abner created psychological and physical damage in Sardi. During this short story, we see a dynamic character, which would be Sardi. Sardi completely changes his perspective starting on page 5, where they approach the Despain house. So there is also a definite patriarchy in the story surrounding Abner. His family will defend him nearly no matter what, even if they disagree with him. At some points they will object, but most of the time they're going to follow his words. It's it's sad. It's sad. But even if he's doing something that's totally morally wrong and against the law, they won't object to it because he is the man of the house. I explicated the paragraph that we previously mentioned, and another reason why it might be so difficult for Sardi is because Abner is unstoppable according to the text. He is stiff, he is cut from tin, and he also has rage. So this rage combined with his fire-setting violent tendencies is terrifying. It's no surprise that Sardi fears him more than he could ever respect him. What does this all mean? It means that the situation is probably more complex than we imagined it to be when we first read this short story. Abner is more complex because he has all these emotions going on. He's seeking revenge and retribution for people that have wronged him. He potentially experienced child abuse when he was a child, and something is wrong with his visualization of how a family is set up. All of this adds to the conflict and makes this story better from a fictional standpoint, and it provides a lot of depth to the characters that we didn't once see. Between Abner's fire-setting tendencies and the father wound that was created in Sardi, we can see that there's a lot more going on in this story than just one man setting fires and one son trying to oppose him. Thank you for listening.